Welcome to Whispers of the Past. I'm your host, Fi de Wit. And in this episode, I invite you behind the scenes of Season 1. This series began as a whisper in my own heart, a calling to trace stories hidden in plain sight across into Statia's, a place I hold dear in my heart due to my own ties with this beautiful island. My desire was to tell history, not only through documents and dates, but through the lives of women. Why women, you may ask? Because growing up, and still, if we look at history, it's almost always men that are being highlighted, and women are just simply left outside of the narrative. But it was the women who held families together, who led in silence, grieved in private, and carved their wisdom into the land. Throughout this season, we explore the legacy of a matrifocal society on this island, where strength is quiet and resilience often worn like a second skin. We examined folklore and theory and followed the devastating echoes left by enslavement, migration, and silence. And in doing so, we made space for what was too often left out of the narrative, the stories of enslaved women. Women whose voices were erased from the archives, overwritten by Eurocentric records that measured value in land, names, and power, but not in care, kinship, or survival. This podcast has been a way to bring those voices to light and to shift the lens, to say, hey, we are here, we mattered, and we still do. So in this special episode, I'm going to share with you how this season came to be, the inspiration behind it, some unexpected turns, and where the whispers might carry us next. This podcast didn't just begin in the studio. It began with a feeling, a longing, a whisper. The reason why I began Whispers of the Past is threefold. It's rooted in memory, mentorship, and a quiet fire that turned into action. So the first reason is the island, Statia. I grew up between two worlds, the grayness of the Netherlands and the sun-soaked soul of Statia. Every summer and some winters, we came back here. And every time we returned back to the Netherlands, my parents would say she got the Statia blues. Because I did. Because something would stay behind. Among the volcanic black sand, the crystal blue ocean, and the familiar laughter of people who raised me with kindness and stories. For me, the island softened the edges of the world. And it was this place that has shaped my becoming. The second reason is my godmom, Mrs. Soutekouw. How did you feel when I said I wanted to do this and that you were a big inspiration for me?
I was very proud of you for that. I also had my reservations because finding out the history of the women is very difficult. This is the same thing as finding out the history of a country. History is written by the conqueror and the powerful. It is not written by the conquered and the less powerful. And in history, women have always been considered less powerful. They aren't. But they had to wield their power in a gentle way. At the same time, they were not recognized for the powers they really were.
My godmom took me to archaeological digs when I was just a kid, and she told me to look down to the soil of memory, because when you walk, you'll see stories everywhere. And it was through her that I first learned that history is not something in the past or something very far away. It lives in our hands, in the soil we walk on. in the women who were never written into books, but lived full lives anyway. It was her that inspired me to look at history through the lens of women. And then thirdly, a book. It's a book called If Women Rose Rooted by Sharon Blackie. Though the book itself is really woven from Celtic myths and European soil, it offered a truth that crossed oceans. One of the things that she writes about in her book is change begins small. And we can either sit in our grief and our frustration with the silences of history, or we can rise and speak. So this podcast is my rising, a way of honoring the women history erased and letting their strength echo forward through sound, through memory, and through you. Since beginning this journey, something unexpected happened. My anger towards the patriarchy has quietened, and the resentment that I held has softened. Because in telling these stories, I stepped into action. And action is its own kind of healing. It's my hope that this offering becomes part of a much older ripple of change, one that began with women way before me. The ancestors who had no microphones, but left legacy in their footsteps. And that in your own way, in your own voice, you too will carry it forward. So nothing is ever really done in isolation. And this podcast, this living archive of memory, would have never come to life without the people and the support that surrounded it. So first of all, a dream needs roots. I had an idea, a vision, a feeling in my chest that I wouldn't let go. For about 2.5 years in my mind, I had already created this podcast. But it wasn't until I started conversations with Cultuurfonds Caribisch Gebied and Fonds voor Cultuurparticipatie, who gave this project wings. They saw a possibility in the idea. They believe that storytelling, especially storytelling rooted in Caribbean soil, deserved to be funded and deserved to be heard. We live in a world where dreams need money, and that's unfortunately the truth. And I'm endlessly grateful that these funds made space for voices often pushed to the margins, women's voices, and in particularly in our case, voices from Statias. Because of that support, the financial support that this project was granted, I was able to build a team. And let me tell you, behind every whisper you've heard, there's been a chorus of hands, heart, and hard work. So part of this amazing team, we have Eugene, our sound designer. He's in the studio with me right now. We've had Ankeli, who helped me also with recordings for voiceovers. Sarah, our web designer, who took a vision and made it visible. Our podcast producers, Ivo and Ali, who helped me shape the foundation of the podcast and the distribution. And the graphic designer, Nikat, who translated each episode and the podcast logo into a visual image. And last but not least, we have Vanessa and Chandra, two sisters from this very island, who handled our social media with care and pride. Now, I had this dream of only hiring women, not because I'm against men, actually far from it. I've been shaped by strong, tender men too. But I wanted to tip the scale evenly, to empower more women through this process, behind the mic as well as in front of it. And then there was another stumbling block that I came across. Because life happens. COVID, deadlines, full-time job. Moments where I thought I wouldn't finish, but somehow we made it. Because that's the magic of community. You find your people, you keep going, even when it's messy, and even when it's hard. So how did we do it technically? Well, it was a dance. Between remote interviews, because most of the people that you hear on this podcast are not necessarily located here. Zoom calls, voice notes, recording in quiet corners of the island. And then for the visuals, chasing good light. And it wasn't always perfect, but it was real. And maybe that's what makes it beautiful. So if you're listening and you've got an idea, a story, a vision, my advice, find your people. Start where you are. And don't be afraid to whisper into this world. Some of the highlights and stumbling blocks. So if I had to pick a favorite moment from this season, honestly, it's kind of hard because every episode we poured in so much effort. But I have kind of two highlights. For me, episode 2 on the Amerindians has a special place in my heart. It really reminded me that Statia's story did not begin with the colonizers or even the traders. It began with a deep sacred relationship with the land, with the elements, even the indigenous name, Aloe Island. And this was so unexpected. I didn't realize that there was a matrifocal society here. That was such an unexpected fact to discover. And then episode 4, The Curse of the Blue Bead, that one really hit me in the gut. I did not expect it to be so emotional. And writing those voiceovers broke something in me. I cried a lot during that time. I felt the injustice, the way, women were treated, how that pain was woven into silence. And it just made me so angry, deeply upset and frustrated. Not just for them, but also how often those patterns are still present in our life today. Something I definitely did not anticipate was the emotional toll that this kind of storytelling takes. I'm a highly sensitive person, and this wasn't just a creative project. It required me often to process kind of this grief that I felt that wasn't always mine, almost like a collective grief. And I sometimes had to start scheduling emotional space, not just the editing time. Often when we have an episode going live, I had already listened to it 5 times. But yeah, when I started this project, the podcast producer, Ifo, would often say ooh, that's an aggressive, timeline. And it's true. You just, things come up that you don't account for. And this is definitely one of my lessons that I learned. So sometimes, life gets in the way, deadline wavers, and yeah, he was right. Creating something this layered, this alive, takes more than discipline. It also really takes heart space. One of the brightest lights in all of this is, spending time with the elders. I give chair yoga on a weekly basis, so I already have a bond. But sitting down with some of the elders and recording their stories, their laughter, their wisdom, that was really something magical. And I'll never forget one of the quotes by Mrs. Rivers.
What I like about Statia, you're free. I am free.
I didn't expect her to say this. We were talking and she says that she's free. And that's why she loves Statia, because of the freedom here. It was just so simple, but in that moment, I felt yes, we're going to use that to bring this series to an end, because freedom isn't always loud. It's a quiet truth spoken by someone who has lived enough life to know what it really, really means. So you might wonder the big question, will there be a season 2? And the answer is the whispers haven't gone quiet. It's still humming in the background, soft and persistent. There are more stories waiting, more voices still unheard, more roots to uncover beneath the soil of memory. And for now, we are taking a short creative pause to breathe, to reflect, to listen again before speaking. So we're exploring new themes and looking into funding and what's possible. It's really important for me to move with intention, and we want to build this next chapter with reference. So yes, the ambition is alive, and when it's time, we'll return with more echoes, more truth, and more of a fierce, quiet courage that began this journey. So please stay close, watch this space. And when the next whisper rises, you'll be the first to know. Before we close, I want to pause and say thank you. First of all, to you, the listeners who turned in from near and far, who made space in your heart and your headphones for these stories to live again. Your presence gave this work breath. And to the remarkable team behind Whispers of the Past, thank you for carrying me and this vision. From production to design, from sound to story, you elevated each episode into something I could only dream of. Thank you to my personal cheerleaders, my friends who encouraged me from the beginning. And then we have the voices, the ones you heard and the ones who remain unnamed. Thank you to Mr. Soutekouw, to Mr. Richardson, Dr. Anna Hanslin, Dr. Elaine, Dr. Stelton, Dr. Morsink, and Dr. Sahidi. Your scholarship, your expertise grounded the soul of this series. And then to the local wisdom keepers, Governor Francis, Mr. Burkle, Mrs. Rivers, and Mrs. Bennett. Your stories made the past feel like a living room we could sit in. Every word you shared became a thread woven into collective remembering. This podcast began as a whisper, a quiet yearning to reclaim the untold, to make space for women's voices in archives where silences had settled. It was never just about history. It was about healing and about reclaiming the right to say, we're here, we mattered, and we carried on. If there's anything I hope you take from this, let it be this. Stories are not just remnants of the past. They are reminders of what we can still transform. Until next time, may the whispers lead you where truth calls, where healing awaits, and where the future is shaped by those who dare to remember.
Welcome to my